Cool. Okay guys, we are going to continue with our project, and in this project, if this is the first video that you are watching, we are actually adding an identity into our application that is going to provide us with all the necessary functionality to be able to authenticate users in our application. So now, the last time we met, we said we are going to actually design or define the types that we are going to require in the process of authenticating the user. The first one that we have customly defined is the login view. The login view has two properties: the username and password. This is basically the information or data that the user will enter in order to be authenticated in our application. In the next subsequent lessons or videos, I will also design other types for registration, and we will see how to manage all these types to actually create the user accounts, manage them, remove them when we want to remove them, and all of that. But for now, let's focus on when the user logs in, which types do we need. Then one of those types is the login view. That basically gives us the view that the user is going to see and provide the user with inputs where they can enter their username and their password. If this user already exists, then we can check against the stored user data to see if the user does exist, and if they do exist, they have entered the correct username and password, and log them in. So there are attributes to these properties of the login view that we are going to apply in order to configure them. For example, one of those attributes is the required attribute. The required attribute makes sure that the user does enter the username, and the other attribute is the data type, where we want the user data dot email address. So here we want them to enter something that is an email address. It basically needs to validate the user input to actually enter a valid email address. Then the password, we're going to do the same. The password is required, and we also going to use this attribute to force the user to enter their password. So this is the password type. So I think these two are just fine for now. We will see as we actually design or develop this application if we do need to add more attributes, and we'll see what attributes we actually need to add here. But for now, it is fine. So now that we do have a view of the login inputs, we need to go and actually add the login model, which is basically what is going to hold the events, or which is actually the model that is going to inherit from, like this one. I will make an example of this one. That will inherit a model that is going to inherit from page model, and this is where we're going to add the code to actually manage and handle all the events that will be generated by the user when they actually log into our site. So how do we do that? We are going to create something. I have these commands here already, guys, so I'm just going to pick the one that I want. I want. I'll look for it. I'll just change this one. So we're going to add a razor page that is called login, and it's going to be based on an empty template. We need a data context. Let's try to add a data context. Somewhere, somehow, we're going to add, and when you add a data context, you have to actually specify also the whole or the full uh, namespace here. The context that we want to add, it's this one. For this one, and the model that we want to use, we want to use this model. Let's try it. Are we going to this model? No. Okay, we are making a mistake now because this is not what we want. This is not what we want. We don't want to base it on the model. I want to add all this code, and if we try to do things this way, we will mess things up. Apologize for this. Let me just add an empty one, then we'll add all the code manually. Could not find project. I always make this mistake. We have to go to a directory that contains the project file. So the project file is contained inside custom identity. I don't need to finish the whole word. So now we can add this page. Yeah, we can add this page. Come on, we can add this page. It's gonna create custom pages folder under the pages folder. As you can see, there's no custom pages folder yet. What it's going to do is going to create the custom pages folder, and then it's going to create a razor page called login. A razor page, as I assume that you know, it's basically composed of two files. One of those files, it has an extension of .cshtml, and the second one has the extension of .chtml.cs. So our file has been added. There should be custom pages here. Should be a folder, or it's not yet done. Just it. Come on, why is it taking so long? Are you gonna take a minute to create a simple razor page? There we go. There we go. Boom. There is custom pages. Now is there. This is the page. This is where we're going to enter the code, and this is where our events are going to be handled. So as I've said from the beginning of this course, we're going to add everything manually because I want you to understand like how when you auto generate, or when you use the scaffold, the .NET CLI scaffolding, how this code comes together. Obviously, when you do some things on production, because you have deadlines, you're gonna have to use the scaffolding, like to auto generate some of the code. But it's important that even when you use these auto generate code, you've got to know how they come together, because it does get to a point where you have to do things manually, and if you don't understand the structure and how the auto-generated code comes together, you might get lost. So here we are basically adding everything manually. As you can see, we have a login model. It's an empty one. We have a login model. It's empty. Our page is also empty. So now, without wasting any time, here we already have a method called onGet, and I want this method to actually be an asynchronous method. I believe that it should return task, and then have onGet async. Let's see, what is this? This async method lacks await. Very good. So basically, this is the method that is provided by ASP, ASP.NET Core. So we are going to override it. Yeah, we are going to override it. So this is not the method that is defined by us as we are defining. No, we are given that method. It's in the framework. So now the error or the warning that we are getting is that it lacks await. Yes, that makes sense. So here, this is the method that will be called when the user visits the login page. Does that make sense? When they enter to visit the login page, this is the method that is going to be called. So here you can do everything that you would want to do when the user gets your page. Now there's another method that we are going to write. It's also an overload method. We're going to make it let's say task. We want it action result, and then we're going on post async. On post async, here we're going to accept as the parameter the return URL in case the user was coming from somewhere, and we're going to empty. Okay, let's do this. The default one is now. So we also have the same warning as lacks await. We're going to write this. This one is the method that is going to be called when you make a post to this Razor page, to this Razor page. So what do we want to happen when this user visits this page? We are going to write, let's first write the HTML code to actually accept these inputs. We need to write an HTML code to accept these two inputs. Cool. Guys, off the camera, this is basically the code that I've written. This is how our login page is going to look like. I couldn't write this while recording. It was going to be really a very long video, so I decided to just do it off the recording. But this is basically what the code looks like. Here we have this model, login model, being injected into this page when the page is requested. This is the page that we are going to get. The model, the login model defines two private properties: the sign-in manager, that is used to manage the application user, and we have the iLogger also, is used to log everything about the login model. So these two private properties are actually injected by the built-in injection dependency injection of ASP.NET Core, and we accept them as the parameters of our login model. Remember, the injection can happen in different ways. It can happen through the constructor injection, property injection, or method injection. So here we are actually using the constructor injection. That means the dependencies will be injected through the constructor of the type. That means these dependencies will be injected when the type is created. So we'll accept these types from the dependency injection. Does that make sense? And then we define a property called inputs. These will be the inputs of the user, and these inputs are actually based on the login view. You'll remember that the login view defines these properties: username, password, and what we have added is the remember me, where a user is going to just select whether they want to be remembered by the system. Does that make sense? So we also adorned this input property of login model with bind property, and this makes sure that when the user does a post during the binding process, this property is going to be used as part of the binding process. And that means that the inputs that represent these types, the username input, will be assigned to these properties. The username input will be assigned to the username property, and the password will be assigned to the password property, and the remember me is going to be assigned to the remember me property, and this will happen automatically during the model binding. So you have no control, but you can actually modify the model, how the model is binded, but that is outside the scope of this video. But here all we are doing is that we actually adorned this input property with the bind property to tell the framework that we want this property, the input property, to be part of the model binding. So the model binding is going to use the names that are found within this type to actually map which inputs from the user is going to go to which property into our login view. So the bind property, you are informing the framework that you want this to be part of the binding property. The other property that we define is the return URL, and this is set probably when the user tries to access a restricted resource without being authenticated. For example, the user hasn't logged into our site, but he tries to access the part of the site that is restricted to only a certain type of users. So during that process, when he tries to access that resource, we are able to set the URL that the user was trying to access, which will be basically point to the property that we have restricted access to, and then redirect them to where they can log in, so that we identify them, and then after identifying them, then we log them into our site. After logging them in, we are able to get this return URL, which is basically it's a URL that points to the original URL. If we authenticate them and we find that they do have an access to the resource, then we can give them an access. This is a return URL, which basically points to the original URL that the user has requested to access. Does that make sense? So those are only the changes that I've made. So now the next thing that to do is to write some code inside these two methods. As you can see, these two methods have a warning that there's no await, and what we need to do here is basically do this await. We need to make sure that we clear any login cookie if that is available. So we do that through http client dot, no, not http client, what the hell are you doing? Not http client. So we use http context dot sign should be a method to sign out the user here. Sign out async, sign out async. Let's see. Yeah, it's an extension method sign out async identity constants dot external scheme. Yeah, that's all you need to do for now. There may be other stuff that you will now want to do, but for now that one is enough. So now here what we are going to do, this is where the most important thing is happening. This is where we're going to actually sign in our user. But now the first thing that we're going to need to do is to check if the model is valid. So that means if the user has entered something, let's check model state dot come on man. If model state dot is valid, what we need to do, we need to sign in the user, and remember we use the sign in manager that is injected through dependency injection. So we're going to store the results into the variable called results, and then we say sign in manager, okay, sign in manager dot sign in password sign in async. So we use the input dot email dot username, and then input dot password, and then it's remember me here. We need to input dot remember me lockout input dot remember me, and then say lock out user lockout on failure, lock out on failure. Let's set it to false. So now they say we have possible null reference. You know what you need to do. Let's do this. Let's try to do this. Okay, it's not working. You know, the best way to avoid this is to, before we do this, let's actually check and to make sure that input let's actually make sure that input dot username is not null, or input dot password is not null. Then we can do this. Let's see, possible null reference. Let me see, can I do this? Yeah, just leave them. Cool. So now this is going to log in the user, but then we need to check the results because the user may log in with the wrong results. So the results that we are going to get here is that if results dot succeeded status dot result, let's see, sign in results, result dot succeeded, results dot succeeded. Wait a minute, what is going on now? Something is not right here. Okay, here's what you need to do, bro. Dot succeeded. Cool. So then you can do whatever you want on success. If so, it's possible that it may not be successful. dot is not allowed, which happens when the user has not confirmed the do what is what you want on failure. Cool. So this is basically how it should look like. This is how it looks like. So we're going to test this code. We're going to test this code just now. We're going to test this code just now, and we're just going to return a page. We're just going to return the same page. Excuse me. So now we have added the sign in password. So here you just need to add your code. Where do you want to redirect these users if they were successfully signed in, or where would you want to redirect them if they were not successful in logging in. So it will just depend on what you want.